Right, so for this episode of my podcast, I spoke to Dr. Maggie Gilewicz. She is the author of this new book, How to Make Sure Your Life Doesn't Suck. And it's an interesting book. The concept is that most of the time we think that our sense of satisfaction, our interaction with life is based on circumstances. So we're feeling angry because something outside has made us angry, or we're feeling successful because certain circumstances have happened. But actually the opposite is true. So we create the world through our perspective. So if you're in a good mood, for example, things seem much more positive on the outside. If you're in a bad mood, everything seems to be going against you. That kind of thing. So that's a kind of very loose, very simple interpretation, but we get into a lot more exciting details in our conversations. Have a listen. The video cuts out a little bit early, so if you want the full conversation, then check out the audio on iTunes or Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts from. And in the meantime, enjoy this conversation with me and Dr. Maggie Gilewicz, the author of How to Make Sure Your Life Doesn't Suck. All right, cheers to that. So I'm very lucky to be here with Dr. Maggie Gilewicz, the author of How to Make Sure Your Life Doesn't Suck, which is a kind of different type of... It's not really a self-help book, is it? Really, it's more...
If there was a different name for this genre, I would use it. Someone suggested self-awareness, but let's go with self-help for now.
Okay, so it's kind of about altering your perspective and finding a better way of looking at life, I suppose. Mm-hmm. So first of all, I guess, why is that an important thing?
Oh my God. I think it's everything. You know, in the book, I actually added a chapter because I thought it would be, by talking about myself and my story, it would be easier to just demonstrate what I mean by looking at life from the inside out, because essentially this is what this book is about. It's about...
So most people, or generally when we're growing up and when we're going about our day, we look at life from the outside in. Mm-hmm. So that is, we expect the world around us to make us happy, to give us, to reward us, to make life good for us, when actually the other way is true, that we actually see life from the inside out. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so explain a little bit more about that. How did you come to that realization and that understanding of that's how we see the world?
So I think, first of all, I think whatever we are in life is where we're meant to be. So I really want to make this very clear that I am not in a business of judging where everyone is at in terms of their understanding of how things work in life, in terms of their life philosophy. Okay, I can only speak of myself and my evolution in terms of my understanding. So pretty much, I think it's, pretty much from the most part of my life, I lived from this outside-in perspective, which basically meant that I believed that how I feel had everything to do with the external world. It had to do with what people do to me, what people say, how they behave. It had to do with my circumstances, events in my life, and so on and so forth. So it wasn't a belief or a choice. It was just how life looked to me. Okay. But I can tell you that from an early age, I was a seeker. I can't really explain that. I've always been looking for something, for a deeper meaning in everything. You know, I was never satisfied just with sort of clean answers. I was always looking for something deeper. I always tried to understand things deeper. And this is how I think it led me to various books and various people. And I came across first books that were related with psychology, and then a few, you could call them self-help books, but more spiritual books, I would say. Okay. But anyway,
because I mean, there are echoes. This book is very practical, and it doesn't get into mysticism or religion or anything like that. But there are echoes of things like Buddhism and Taoism and things like that in there. And I get the impression that you intentionally keep it away from that kind of thing to make it much more kind of tangible for people.
I'm going to get back to this one. I just want to tell you that at first I got into this subject of, I found books or people talking about how actually how we think is very important. I remember that we have choice, that we can choose our thoughts, that we can control our thoughts, that we have power over our thinking. And I remember that was a revelation to me, because living in this understanding that, you know, my feelings come from somewhere else and not from my thinking, to even realize that I was thinking, you know, a lot, and how much it had to do with how I felt, that was a major revelation. But what I didn't feel comfortable with was the idea that I would have to constantly control my thoughts in order to feel better. Or that I would have to think positive all the time.
Almost like going into battle with your thoughts. Just to, I'm in charge here.
And that's right, Chris. This is exactly how for a while I felt, because I read a lot of books that were talking about, and again, I want to point out that this was, I don't see it as something malicious on the part of the people who talk about it, those people who ask us to control our thoughts and to think positive. I think they're coming from a very good place. They mean well. I'm just saying that for me personally, it really felt as if I would have to wage a constant battle with my negative feelings in order to feel well. You know?
Okay.
And that was exhausting.
So you were in a position where you were feeling overwhelmed? What was the... What
I was just
led
feeling...
you to this?
I was just feeling up and down a lot. Part of it was my situation at the time in my life, my personal life. I started to really dig deeper, to understand where my unhappiness at the time really came from. Because at the beginning I thought it came from my relationship, the fact that I wasn't really happy in my relationship, so I thought that my unhappiness had to do with that. And I got this book, which I'll tell the story in the book as well. I got this book called You Can Have What You Want, which was like, honestly, the cliches of the self-help cliches, with all due respect to the author. But honestly, because I was doing my PhD at the time, self-help books were really frowned upon, in fact, I'm not really sure. I feel that it was me who invented this term pseudo-psychology for the masses, I
know what you mean. It's kind of low quality.
Low quality.
It doesn't even qualify as psychology.
Correct. And so I was the first one to sort of dismiss them by default, because in academic circles, they were just frowned upon. And then I realized that I haven't read enough of those books to have a well-informed opinion, and that was quite actually unfair on my part as a person who considers myself open-minded. But saying this, I understand where that perception comes from, because honestly, I have read those books since, a lot of them, and a lot of them have been full of fluff. In my view.
A lot of it is really cheesy. I remember when I was writing my first book, and I was trying to explain to people what it was without saying it's a self-help book. And people would say, "You're writing a self-help book, aren't you?" And I'd be like, I suppose so. I suppose I am. And I felt a little bit embarrassed about that.
I can completely relate to this, and I know that still a lot of people will not read this book because of the title, because it sounds so self-help. A lot of people won't read because they had bad experiences with those fluffy books, so to speak. And again, I mean no disrespect, and here's why. Because I really believe that every person who wrote the self-help book really meant well. They basically share something that made difference to them, right? And I think we're so different and so unique that different things resonate differently with different people, and it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the book. Sometimes it has to do with the timing. If you read my book on a bad day, really bad day, when you feel really low, it will probably piss you off. I bet. You'd be like, oh, what are you telling? You're telling me that it's all me, that kind of thing. You're going to be reactive.
Well, when I first started reading books, some of the books that helped me kind of get out of the rut I felt stuck in. It was like a revelation. And since then, I've picked up so many self-help books, which are supposed to be equally as good. And I kind of got halfway through and I thought, it's not doing anything for me. And it's probably because I don't need that ladder now. You know,
Possibly.
I'm probably
Yeah.
in a place now,
I mean,
much better place.
there are so many factors. I want to give you a great example of how, again, everything is our perception that comes from the inside out.
Yeah.
Someone whose opinion I really respect, who's a very, very accomplished author in the actual self-help genre, read my manuscript. And the first time they go back to me, I was waiting for this feedback because I really respect their opinion. And the feedback wasn't, I wouldn't say it was bad, but it wasn't very good.
Yeah.
But I really listened to it because I really love constructive feedback because it proves my work. My ego might not like it.
Yeah.
Okay, temporarily I might have a little meltdown, but I really learned from it. I respect it. I want it. You know, I don't want people to tell me how awesome things are. You know, I want them to tell me where things don't work so I can improve it. And I listened to that feedback of his and I thought, something just doesn't stick. And it's not because I didn't like what he said, but I almost felt as if he was either rushing it or he was reading it in a bad mood or something like that because of certain comments that he made. And without knowing, he actually went back to this manuscript. He read it the second time. I didn't know that. And he got back to me with the feedback. And he was like, it's awesome. The book is awesome. You should go for it's ready for publishers. You know, you just do it, you know. And I'm like, this is the same person reading the same manuscript, having a completely different experience. How is that possible, right? It's the same book. So this is just a perfect example.
And it kind of proved the point of the book.
Correct. Yeah. Which is why I asked him what happened, and he said, you know, the first time I read it, I was really in a hurry. I had so much on my mind, and I was so annoyed that I had to spend my time doing this because I didn't want to disappoint. So I really wasn't present. I was just like, come on, you know, let's just get through it, that kind of thing. And it completely changed the perception of his book to the one when he was on the plane the second time. He had a long, cold flight. He was relaxed. He had a glass of wine, you know, and then he read it and he resonated with it and saw it differently, you know. So, I mean, so this is just a great example of how the trouble is that most people are not aware. We're not aware that we are thinking constantly.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
A 24/7 process.
So,
you know?
So explain the kind of idea of the book, the whole inside out and outside in.
Okay, so we started from talking about how I felt about life most of my life, right? Which is that people, circumstances, situations, events have something to do with what I feel.
They basically make you feel either awful or you're good, desperate for them to make you feel good, or you blame people for your circumstances.
But basically, that's the important part. You know, this was a big one, you know, really depending my well-being on other people. This was a big one, okay? Yeah. Then stage one, like I said, I came across this idea that, first of all, we think that our thoughts have power, and that and that we should control these thoughts and work on ourselves and or think positive all the time. And like I said, it was a revelation, and I'm glad that I discovered it because it was a major revelation. Because now my mind was like, oh, okay, so it's not just my circumstances; it's actually how I think. But like I said, it became tiring. Yeah. You know what I mean? It really felt like this constant battle between me and my feelings, in particular negative feelings, you know, and it was exhausting. Then I came across spiritual books because you talked about how you can see some bits and pieces that sort of resonate with you in terms of like Buddhism or Taoism and stuff like that. So I read those spiritual books, and I kind of felt that I knew what they were talking about, but the language was so
fluffy.
I wouldn't say it's fluffy, but sort of the spiritual lingo, the typical spiritual lingo, and I don't know how to explain it, but it was like it's only a language that only spiritual people can understand, and I didn't even consider myself a spiritual person at the time.
And that turns a lot of people off.
Yes.
You know, when actually sometimes the core message of these so-called spiritual books is actually very practical stuff.
Totally.
But it's wrapped up in this language that, you know, people look at it and they go, oh, God, it's not for me. it's not for me. But when actually, if you can push past that, there can be some quite useful messages there.
Oh, and by the way, the stuff that I talk about in my book is the same stuff that they all talk about.
Yeah.
It's just that I talk about it in a very simple and common sense way, or at least I like to think that I do. But honestly, Chris, it took me years to find that language, because then I went. So this is one of the things I read these spiritual books, and I kind of felt that there was truth to what they were talking about, but I just couldn't get it on a deeper level. I was getting it sort of intellectually. I obviously understood the words and the sentences and so on, but I really couldn't get it. And then I signed up for this course. It was more like an apprenticeship program with Michael Neal. He's a very famous Hay House author.
He wrote that book, How to Get What
He
You
wrote
Want.
the book, You Can Have What You Want. That's right, yeah. And the book, he was already, even where he was with this book, was a completely different stage in his evolution. And so, but when I read that book, I really, first of all, it was the first time that I actually asked myself what I wanted. What did I want? I realized I was 30 years old, and I realized I never really asked myself this question.
And did you get an answer?
I started getting answers, and I was terrified. I'm telling you, because and again, I'm not talking about things like, oh, what do I want to study? Where do I want to live? Where do I want to travel? I'm talking, what do I want in terms of how do I want to feel? What do I want to do in my life? Just on a much deeper, that question, but on a much deeper level. And I was terrified because I knew that once I ask myself this question properly, it's going to open floodgates. You know what I mean? I'm going to discover things that I wasn't sure I was necessarily ready for, And I knew that it also meant confronting myself with some of the truths that I, again, wasn't sure whether I was ready to confront, about my life, about myself, and things like that. So, but it was a very gently written book, and I really appreciated it. It wasn't like rah, 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 kind of like, come on, you can do this, that kind of thing. It wasn't that kind of self-help book. It was a great starter, and something resonated with me, and I love the language. I love the tone of the book. I love the language that he used to talk about things. And that's how I started, because I'm a natural born researcher. You know what I mean? Like, I think I was doing research in my mother's womb, before I even came out. Once I'm onto something, I need to know everything. So I basically found more information about him. I came across his blog, and honestly, for the first time, I was like, he was talking about how everything is just a thought, how we live in, how our feelings come from thought. But like all the time.
But not just that, like the whole world as we perceive it is a thought in our head. It's an interpretation of signals.
Right.
And then we give it form and give it
understanding. So I was like, okay, I have no idea what you're talking about, mate. But something resonates with me here. So I'm going to stick around. So I'm going to stick around. And I'll tell you why I wanted to stick around. Because he was the first person in the self-help industry that didn't ask me to think positive, didn't ask me to control my thoughts or to do anything with my thoughts. And I thought that was a revelation. You know what I mean? Because like I said, he was the first person in this industry that didn't ask me to do that, or spoke about it in a way that didn't turn me off because it wasn't too spiritual. In fact, he hardly ever used the word spiritual anyway, And again, the thing with being spiritual, I never wanted to call myself spiritual either, because I always had this association that being spiritual is sort of reserved to people who do yoga, meditate in ashrams, and it's like, I'm not that person.
But I have a slightly different take on spirituality. Because I think it's more about your kind of attitude. So like, when I don't know if you have this phrase where you hail from, but in England, when someone sort of is enthusiastic, the common way of kind of responding to that is to say that's the spirit,
That's the
and
spirit.
it's about your kind of your energy. It's like this is my spirit. This is who I am.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of the time it's kind of this pseudo-religious kind of mystical fairies and crystals, and and I try and say, I'm spiritual because my spirit is essentially who I am inside my body, but it's not this fluffy magical thing with angel wings that flies
But that's
around.
the thing, we have preconceived ideas, you
Yeah,
know,
absolutely.
and so I looked at it like,
But I know what you mean. Yeah,
right.
know
I
exactly
can
where you're
only
coming
call
from.
myself spiritual if I do yoga, you know, burn sage and like that kind of stuff. And by the way, nothing wrong with burning sage or any of this stuff. It's just that I at the time did not associate myself with this group of people, and therefore I thought that makes me not spiritual, because I thought these are the spiritual people, right? And also, I'm sure you're familiar with people who say, oh, in order to experience a moment of awakening or enlightenment, you have to be practicing, you have to be meditating, you have to spend a lot of time in solitude, you have to have really disciplined spiritual practice in order to experience the aha moment or the moment of awakening and everything. So that was another thing that put me in a category of just ordinary people, that these things have nothing to do with, and that I'm never going to experience this because I don't do these things, so I'm not entitled to have an awakening.
In your book, you don't give any tasks to do or any kind of exercises or anything like that. There are a couple of kind of thought exercises, but there's no kind of you must do this and you must meditate for 4 hours a day and all this kind of stuff. So it's just kind of asking people to consider another way of thinking. I guess.
I think it's very important, Chris, because I really thought that real change or this moment of awakening or seeing things really fundamentally differently is reserved to people who are spiritual, who do these things, you know, meditate for hours and so on and so on. And just based on my example, I had a proof that it's not the case, you know, because I am an ordinary person. I've never practiced yoga. I've never meditated for hours. In fact, I cannot meditate. I don't know how to do this, which doesn't mean that I discourage it or I have any judgment toward people who do it, because my simple philosophy is this: do whatever the hell works for you. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to anyone else. Do whatever feels right to you, right? But for me, meditation just didn't work. And so when I started looking at Michael and what he does and him sharing this philosophy called either 3 principles or the inside out understanding, I got really, really curious. And I got so curious that I decided that I want to really explore it, because I just felt there was something that was deeper than anything I've known or read about so far. And so soon after that, I signed up to this apprenticeship program, which included me being coached by him, but also then me learning to become a coach who is able basically to share this understanding. And the reason why it's important is because you have to understand it first. You have to have that experience first in order to be able to facilitate it for other people. Otherwise, it just won't work.
So at what point did it click? This kind of new way of seeing how we experience the world.
It took, I think, about 3 months.
Okay.
I think I just couldn't get over this. Because part of it was intellect. I would say that I'm walking with my head in the clouds, but very firmly on the ground, you know, at the same time. You know, I come from a very intellectual, sort of intellect-oriented family, so to speak. Everything has to be measured. Everything has to be put in theories and concepts in order to make sense. Very academic, and, you know, and obviously I started my academic career. I just dropped out because I decided it was not for me. But still, I have a lot of respect for intellect, you know, and things still have to make sense to me, you know.
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, but it stood in a way. It stood in a way because I was overanalyzing everything. And actually, intellect can really stand in a way when it comes to our spiritual change to happen, because we go too much to our heads and analyze too much. So it was a struggle, when I talked about my problems with Michael, and he kept on saying it's just the thought, And I was like, "Are you fucking kidding me? Like,
I've given up 3 months of my time.
Is this really this? And this is going to be a year, and because it was in total, it was going to be a year of me and him working together." And I was like, "Really?" Like, I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't get my head around this. But at some point, I was so exhausted, of fighting back and sort of debating, with him and trying to find examples of where what he was saying was not true, that I gave up. And actually, that was the best thing to do, because all my sort of preconceived ideas went. I really opened my mind, which is essential. You cannot experience change if you don't open your mind and let whatever you have known so far go.
It's really interesting, because I've had last year I had an article in The Guardian where I talked about my experience.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And I talked about my experiences with meditation and how it helped me get over some of the raging thoughts that were going on in my mind and that kind of thing. And people reached out to me and said, "Can you help me cope with my situation as well?"
Yes.
And I said, "Well, yeah, I can give you a hand, but you have to do the work yourself."
Yeah.
And you have to have an open mind, and you have to be receptive. Because when you tell people about getting silent and, just spending time to calm things down, it doesn't sound like, it just sounds so, when you're overwhelmed by the thoughts in your head, and it's such a big deal, something as simple as that actually sounds like,
crazy.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Is that what it is?
To get quiet and to think about gratitude or whatever it was I was talking about at the time, or meditation. And people they didn't come back. So it literally scared people away. And also the idea that, you go to someone, say, how can I get better? And you want them to just tell you how to get better.
Of course.
But when you say to them, well, you're going to have to do the work, that's when it becomes,
do the work, or just be present,
well, even that is
even
work,
that,
isn't it?
right? And I think, and I completely understand that, and we live in the culture of fast food, fast everything, fast solutions, instant change, instant this, instant access, and this is part of the problem. We never really take time to chill the fuck down and to actually reflect on anything.
Well, I mean, that's what you talk about in the book, isn't it? You're talking about, all there is a series of moments, one after another, one after another. Yeah. There is no future. There is no past. Essentially, they're just moments that have been and gone. So all we have is this right now.
But you have to experience it for yourself in order to really understand that, which is why it took me so long to find a language that would be as simple as possible. And one of the best questions that I was asked when I was planning this book by my partner, he said to me, "How do you want your readers to feel when they read your book?" And it turned out to be an extremely important question. Because I realized that, first of all, I wanted them to feel like I don't talk at them, but that we're having a glass of coffee.
Yeah, or wine, or vodka, or...
Why the hell not?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, let's start serving coffee in glasses. Why not? A cup of coffee or a glass of wine or something like that, where I'm talking with you. I'm speaking, we're together in it. I'm just sharing something. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not imposing anything on you. We're just having a conversation, just like me and you at the moment, right? Where I am absolutely respectful of your ideas about how life works. And I'm just giving you my idea. But I'm not imposing. I'm not converting. I'm not trying to convince you or convert you to my truths, So this was very important to me, because the reason why is because I am allergic to when people, first of all, present personal perspectives and opinions as facts, and then they impose those on you. You know, anytime I hear someone saying this is the ultimate truth, I'm out. This is like the quickest way to get rid of me. I'm not going to be part of this conversation.
But sadly, that's kind of the state of the Western world at the moment. This is how politics works. You know, there's no, as you again talk about in the book, there's no dialogue.
No.
There is like, we're on this side and we believe this, and we're on this side and we believe this, and there's no other way about it. We're right, you're wrong, and how dare you say otherwise?
There's no room for conversation when you come to any conversation with that kind of attitude. The simple ability to agree to disagree is a very valuable skill these days, you know, to be able to actually, first of all, yes, have your own opinions and ideas, but be open-minded and actually be willing to listen, to consider a different possibility. And then if you cannot find a common ground, you still remain respectful of each other's differences, right? So, I mean, it's much more easy. It's easier to be reactive and insulted and outraged. It's so easy. It's so easy. You know, it's much more difficult to actually be willing to put your ego aside, to put your opinions about that you've held for many, many years.
But you know, if we stop being outraged by everything we saw on TV,
it's gonna be boring.
There'll be industries would fall apart because there are, you know, the tabloid press is fueled by our outrage. They talk about the attention economy, and now everyone is like looking for our eyeballs and you know, on billboards, on our cell phones and laptops. But there's the outrage economy as well. The angrier you can make people, the more advertising you can sell in your newspaper, and the more you can get people to vote for you and all this kind of stuff. So when people do start to realize that the anger is, I control the anger inside. Like, you can say whatever you want, but I don't have to be angry.
Yeah, you don't have to buy into it.
Exactly. It's
you
this
don't
whole
have to buy into
inside out thing. It's like, I'm no longer angered by these people because the anger comes from within.
But look, it's very easy. Listen, if I'm going to get involved in conversation about Trump on Twitter,
don't
5 minutes from now, I'm going to lose my shit. Guaranteed.
I have to fight it. I have to really
Guaranteed.
fight it.
So it's not about, again, I could go into, let's control myself. I'm going to control myself. I'm going to read these tweets and these news articles, and I'm going to try to control my state of mind and not get outraged, right? I could use this avenue. Or I could just not read it at all and ask myself, and it's not about being in denial, but it's about, is this actually contributing anything to my life that is of value? And given that life is so short and precious, what are my priorities at the moment? Because I can either guaranteed spend the rest of my day being outraged about the state of the politics in America or British politics at the moment, you know, where literally I have zero influence to change that, you know? So if I can't really do anything about it, so why am I going to waste my time and energy getting outraged, which really doesn't contribute anything when I could focus on something that's actually valuable to my life?
But that's, you know, what you touched on something really interesting that you also touch on in the book, is that there are things that you can control and there are things that you can't control. And we focus so much energy on the things we can't control.
Absolutely.
And we expect our lives to be better as a result of it. Where actually, if we were to focus, so for example, politics, what other people do, what other people think, the way other people behave, you know, we're focused in on, this person has been rude to me, this person is outrageous, this person is horrible, whatever, very judgmental.
No.
We have no control over any of that.
No.
But then when we focus in on the things we can control, how we feel, what we think, how we behave, what we eat, you know, the things we can actually control, we start to actually have an influence over the things that previously we couldn't control. So by turning inwards, we actually make our world a lot better.
It doesn't even, you know, it really is not so much about, and I agree, because a lot of times, you know, I feel like I do have a choice. I have a choice whether I'm going to read this article. I have a choice whether I'm going to get involved in this particular conversation on Twitter. And I make these choices every single day. Do I want to get involved in this conversation? Right? I'm pretty good at assessing whether it's worth it. You know what I mean? I can tell straight away from the vibe of the person or a conversation on the thread on Twitter whether this is just a meaningless exchange that's going to just, where a lot of people are going just to get upset and jump at each other, or is it actually a decent conversation where I'm actually learning something? I'm actually being educated by someone who has a maybe different point of view, but they give me something new, something that I didn't consider before, right? So all these questions are incredibly valuable. Just that simple question, is it worth it? Is it worth to read this article? Is it worth to get involved in this conversation, right? What does it contribute to my well-being, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That alone is going to make a huge difference. If we are, but it goes back to just self-awareness and realizing that it's not the Trump, as much as, honestly, even I find it difficult to say that Trump doesn't make me feel anything. It's what I think. There are days when I really question this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like, no, but he really did say this. Oh my God. Or like, he really did do that, right? But I'm telling you, this is the very reason why we can listen to the same conversation, we can watch the same movie, we can read the same book, we can listen to the same person, and 5 people will have 5 different experiences.
Yeah.
Right? Why? Because that experience, how we experience anything, comes from within. You have to have a thought first in order to feel anything. There's just no other way around it. There is no feeling without a thought. But the thing is, though, we're just, and this was one of my major discoveries when I started working with Michael, is that up till then I thought we only think sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, you only think when you're aware that you're thinking, but what about the rest of the times? And this was the greatest discovery for me, which is that no, we think 24/7. We live in what I talk about as describe as a thought-created reality, which means that it's not that you're not sitting, you're Chris, you're sitting there, but my experience of you, how I feel about you, is generated from within. So
Absolutely.
I'm telling you, if I came here in a bad mood, my perception of you would be very different to the one where, today I arrived in a good mood after having a glass of wine. So,
but what's interesting about that is that if you had come here in a bad mood, your perception of me would be very different. But also the way you, as a result of that, the way you would act with me and behave towards me would be very different.
Completely different.
And so the way I would relate to you would be very different. And so in a way, your thought-created world is not just about perception. It actually has a real impact on the world around you.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, people say your thoughts create your world, and you might go, don't be
like,
ridiculous.
what the hell? Yeah.
But actually, it's true. I mean, if you're in a terrible mood and you go stomping about throughout the day, slamming the door in people's faces and kind of beeping your horn in traffic because you left it too late and you're in a rush, the world will mirror that back to you. And so the world will be not just your perception, but actually mirror it back to you. Whereas if you calm down, choose your inputs and choose the things that kind of can put you into a better mood, perhaps, or if you're in a bad mood, distract yourself with something else, like you say in the book. Then the world responds to that, and it can become, you smile at people, they smile back. You hold the door for someone, they say thank you, and it's all of these things. They kind of ripple outwards. So, there is a perception element to it, but by understanding that, you actually physically change the world around you. But it's not magic,
But it's not. To me, the more you sort of realize this, the more you realize how common sense it actually is. That there's nothing outrageous or spiritual or woo or anything about it. It's just logic. It's actually so logical, which is why I really, really love it. And like we were talking when I got here, and I'm talking about it in the book, that you were talking about your commute and how you look at these beautiful people in the morning, and honestly, look at her, she's reading this book, and look at him, he must have had a good day, and the sun is shining, and everything is just so amazing, right? And you will be sitting on the same train on the next day in a bad mood, and they will all annoy you, correct?
They're all ugly, and they're all
ugly, like, what is she wearing? And it's like, what is she think? Why is she looking at me that way?
What's this idiot doing? Like, get out of the way. Completely.
So again, look, if it's not about, to me, it really boils down to being aware, becoming more and more aware that how we perceive anything has everything to do with our current thoughts about whatever it is that is going on around us, okay? And then being okay with it.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not jumping into, okay, so let's change my thoughts for better thoughts, or let's think positive. No, it's actually about realizing, it's more about that, having that awareness. So you stop being victims of life, people, and circumstances, but you realize that no, your experience of life, people, and circumstances comes from within. It's generated from within via thought. The thing is, though, like I said, we think 24/7. We don't realize that we think 24/7 because, just like again, I mentioned this in the book that, and by the way, this is not the plug for the book. Like, I really, you can buy it, but trust me, your world will not fall apart, and you're not going to be unhappy forever unless you buy my book. I can promise you that. You're totally fine with or without my book. I really don't want to create that perception, but you know, I lost the original thought.
But you know, it's not about controlling your thoughts and about
it's not about controlling your thoughts, but the scientists are saying that we have 65,000, between 40 or 65,000 thoughts per day. I mean, it's crazy, right? And then that they travel faster than the speed of light, something like that, right? So, I mean, it's impossible. It's humanly impossible to be aware of all your thoughts. And if you cannot be aware of all your thoughts, then obviously you cannot also control them. It just doesn't make any sense, right? If you can control your thoughts, then you can only control the ones that you are aware of, right? But most of the time you're not. So you don't even realize that from the moment you open your eyes, you have thoughts passing through, which is why I'm giving an example of breathing, that when I ask you to become aware of breathing, right?
It's not like it stops when you stop being aware
of
it. Yeah.
So all of that. So now I'm aware that I'm breathing. You're aware that you're breathing, but like 2 seconds ago, we were not aware that we were breathing. But that doesn't mean that the breathing was not going on, right, behind the scenes. And so the same happens with our thoughts. Our thoughts happen all the time. It's like energy that comes, and then whatever, sometimes certain thoughts just stick. Our awareness sort of highlights them, and then we attach some kind of meaning to them. We attach importance to those thoughts, and it's only then when those thoughts start to impact how we feel, right? And so I think, so this was the biggest game changer, to realize that my entire experience 24/7 about and how I feel about anything in my life comes from nothing but a thought in a moment, okay? But like I said, it's very important to emphasize, this is not about undermining your feelings or undermining your experiences or questioning your circumstances. This has nothing to do with that, right? It's just about having this awareness, because when you have that awareness, you realize how much of how you feel is up to you. And so you really stop being a victim of, like I said, you stop feeling like a victim of life, after that. But really, ultimately, the more you begin to see that, what happens is that you begin to actually embrace your human experience in its entirety. So rather than, as soon as you feel bad, rather than trying to fight it, rather than trying to wage that battle against your negative thoughts or feelings, you basically begin to embrace them more and more as just part of your humanness. And because honestly, because this idea that has been created innocently, I believe, by the self-help industry, is that there is such a thing as a positive state of mind. Like, it's an actual thing that you can achieve.
Like 24/7, like constant.
Like 24/7. I mean, come on. I mean, you would have to be, you would have to stop being. You would have to be some kind of different type of species, because I mean.
And as you talk about, when we don't achieve that, we feel like failures and we feel guilty and we feel like terrible people.
I mean, it's crazy, and which is why I like that we talked about it before we started. Is that, again, I'm not saying that this is a malicious intent on the part of people who write self-help books or something like that, but there has been this idea of you have to be on the top of your game. You have to be motivated 24/7 and feel good about yourself and feel confident.
I mean, there are things we can do.
It's exhausting.
It is exhausting, but there are things we can do to help ourselves. If we find that listening to Donald Trump makes us feel, or doesn't make us, but our reaction to listening to Donald Trump is to feel depressed, or every time we read about Brexit, we feel fed up. Then we can reduce our consumption of that media. We can stop eating junk food and all the things that when we wake up in the morning and we feel a bit anxious or negative. We can improve certain areas of our lives to foster a more positive outlook.
I agree. As long as it's something that's not imposed on you by others, it comes from your... And I think this is very important, actually, and thank you for bringing this up. Because if I do something because someone suggests that it's a good idea, it might possibly not work. Because just because it's a good idea for you to stop eating French fries for breakfast, right? It doesn't mean that it's good for me. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like it's a good idea by the health industry or whatever, So what I'm trying to say that whatever advice, whatever it is that you decide to do in your external world, it has to come from your own genuine intention to do it. Not because it sounds like a good idea, which is why I talk about that difference between doing the things we think we should do as opposed to doing the things that we really want to. So I'm not against making changes, external changes at all. Like, for example, good diet or choosing to read this article or not to read this article. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that whatever it is that you decide to do externally, it's only going to work if it comes from your true desire, rather than from someone else, from somebody else's advice, or from a guru, or from an expert in health industry, if that makes sense.
Well, this really resonated with me in the book, actually, and it's something that I've thought a lot about. And I kind of touch on it a bit in my first book, because we live our lives according to the values of other people. We post pictures of our lives to get as many likes as we can. We kind of think, would our parents approve of this course of action that I'm doing? And we lose track of what we would do, because we're looking for approval here, and we're looking for validation, and we're looking for permission and guidance, and we lose all sense of our own direction and power. And then what happens is our life becomes an inauthentic... I mean, we're going loosely in the direction we're supposed to be going in, but we're kind of veering off course a bit, because this is not actually our life that we're living.
I'm just sitting and going tick, tick.
Yeah, I know, and it's like, and this is kind of where I got. I ended up feeling stuck. I always say I got stuck, but
tell me more about it. What do you mean?
Okay, so I went from a very kind of brief story. Is I went from editing magazines in New York and feeling very pleased with my life, and I had a book published about web design and stuff like that. It's pretty amazing. And then
glam,
and then I pretty much over the next couple of decades nosedived. So I went from that. I retrained as a photographer. I worked as a freelance photographer for many years, but just something wasn't working, and I couldn't figure out how.
May I just say that Chris works in one of the coolest areas of London. It's called Covent Garden, and it's like such a cool spot. You basically downgraded from New York to like Covent Garden, London.
I worked in London before I went to New York.
Tough.
But then, I know. But then, what happened was, because my life, I was kind of thinking, what should I be doing? And I was looking everywhere. I was going online, googling how to sort your life out, how to make it as a freelancer, how to do this. What would my dad want me to do? How would I? What is everyone doing? And I'm looking to everyone else. And I ended up, I couldn't make it work. And I ultimately, not that there's anything wrong with this, but I took a job as a van driver, delivering groceries for a online supermarket. And I did that for a year and a half. And
That's incredible.
Yeah, and I was kind of thinking, how on earth did I get here? And I was so depressed, and I was so miserable. Not that there's anything wrong with it. I met some of the most intelligent and interesting and fascinating and wholesome people ever doing that job. So it's not a criticism of the job, but it's just I never thought I would be there doing that job. And I mean, there were elements of that job which I I relish, and it was an amazing job.
I think it's so awesome that you talk about it, by the way.
Well, I mean, it was
Continue.
just, but it was, I was in a rut, and I was stuck. Or having read your book, I felt that I was stuck because, actually we're not stuck. We're constantly moving forward.
Yeah.
But, I could not seem to get myself out of this situation. And it was only, and I thought life is really unfair, and that was the thing.
Very typical.
Life is unfair. I've worked so hard and I've put so much effort in to doing all the right things according to what you're supposed to do. My LinkedIn profile was amazing. My CV was fantastic. I was sending out, job applications all over the place, and I wasn't getting my reward. And I was really angry and I was bitter. And I would wake up every morning and I'd get up at 3:30 in the morning. And I'm sure anyone who has read my book or seen my Instagram posts or any of this is probably sick and tired of hearing about it. But I would drive through the woods to get to the depot to get in my van and deliver groceries. And I would factor in a little bit of extra time so I could stop, park up in the woods, pour myself a coffee out of my thermos flask and pace up and down and just be like, what am I doing with my life? What am I doing with my life? And then after having tried everything to fix it that you're supposed to do, that's when I started looking inwards. And I realized, and literally, it happened very quickly. It was probably a period of 6 months, a year perhaps. But it wasn't just about me changing my perspective, which I did, but that led to my actual circumstances changing.
So can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
2 questions, actually. What do you mean, if you were to explain to someone, what do you mean by looking inwards?
So, like we've kind of touched on, this inside-out perspective on the world. So, I've tried to control everything out here. I can't control it. And I am deeply miserable. So what if I instead focus not on trying to, all the things that are supposed to make me feel good out here, all the rewards I'm supposed to have, what if I just focus on not trying to be deeply miserable? What if that becomes my task? So doing things that make me grateful for where I am and make me appreciate where I am right now. And part of that was I got into meditation. So, because I was overwhelmed by thoughts of how I was a failure and all this kind of stuff. And then when I realized that, I don't have to listen to those thoughts. They're not me. Because we associate our thoughts to be part of us. So it was not about controlling my thoughts, but just taking a step back from them. And I realized and that's when we talked about awareness. So that's when I developed this kind of sense of self-awareness. It's like, I'm not my thoughts, and I'm not actually my physical body. This is just what I'm in, because I've had this body my whole life, but my body now is very different to the one I was born in. So actually, is it even the same body?
Yeah.
So, but I don't think I've changed in here.
Yeah.
And then you become aware of actually, I don't have to be miserable all the time. Just because I'm not rich or I don't have a nice car or I'm not doing the job I thought I'd be doing, I don't have to let that dictate who I am or how I feel. But then as a result of me changing my perspective, actually things started to fall into place outside of myself. And my career improved. And it's not magic, it's logic.
Of course not.
Because we have this cause and effect thing going on.
Of course.
When life gets good, I will be happy. When actually it's the other way around. When I'm happy, life will get good.
Totally.
Because, you talk about it in your book. It's not about changing ourselves into something new. It's just about uncovering what we've already got inside. And that's why I think this is such a good book, because there's no magic in there. It's not The Secret. We're not doing any kind of incantations. It's just about rearranging the kind of blocks of our lives that are already there.
And that was one of the most important things for me to convey, is that I just wanted people to embrace their humanness, and what I mean by that is that really the fact that you feel miserable at times is okay. The fact that you feel happy sometimes, it's okay. The fact that you feel insecure at times, it's okay. The thing that we don't realize is that, for example, we take instances where we felt insecure or shy, and we'll make it to being parts of our identity, as if it is something fixed, right? Yeah. And then we will find these examples where that was the case. and then we'll treat it as an evidence to confirm these ideas that we have about ourselves. When really the truth is, you can never be permanently insecure. You can never feel permanently confident. But when you're not willing to find examples in your life when you actually felt confident, when you actually felt secure enough to do something, then you're never going to see it. So what I'm saying is, of course, we have personalities and things like that. But I think when we realize that how we think about it, how we think about ourselves, also comes from a thought.
Yeah.
It's not something that is fixed, that's permanent, that's all that we are, then we can be more open-minded, and then we can actually allow to see ourselves differently. Yeah. But if you make yourself to be, I'm this, and that, full stop, you know what I mean? Yeah. Then I can tell you, oh no, you're also this, and I've seen you do this, and you'll be like, no,
and
that's not who I am.
But it's like you were saying about, I'm a shy person, but there are times when you're not going to be shy. So there are going to be times when you're doing something you enjoy, like cooking. You're not shy when you're cooking. You might be shy when you're getting up and trying to give a speech to a room full of people.
Yeah, but you're not permanently shy.
No,
right?
Exactly. Yeah,
exactly. Which is why I have a problem with people. No, I have a problem with labels.
Yeah.
And concepts, because I think we are incredibly complex, and this is what I find so incredibly fascinating about us human beings, is that we're not just this or that. But when you attach a concept to yourself or a label, that's it. That's it.
Completely.
That's where it ends. You're putting this infinity of awesomeness that is you, the human being, into a box. You're making it small, you're making it confined. There's no room for growth. There's no room to learn something new. There's no room to become something else.
There's someone I forget who it was, but some great writer or philosopher once said that as soon as you tell a child that fluffy thing in the sky is a cloud, you've forever stopped it being anything else.
Yeah.
Because it is now, that is a cloud. And it's the same. I'm a student of Buddhism. I'm a student of Taoism. I read a lot about different kind of, the Stoic philosophies and things like this. But I'm not a Stoicist. I'm not a Buddhist. And I remember once I happened to put something online that, I was really into Buddhism, or I wrote a blog post about Buddhism. And suddenly I had devout Buddhists coming and talking to me about the sutras and things like this. And I'm like, I don't know anything about this because I'm not a Buddhist.
Yeah.
And even the Buddha said, don't take my words as kind of scripture. Just go and find out for yourself,
Yeah.
And I mean, there's something you said in your book, which I'm kind of going to go off in a slightly different direction. But it kind of echoes something Buddha is supposed to have said.
Yeah.
So even though there's no record of Buddha's talks in his own, in his words in his own language.
Yeah.
But you said, we're talking about thoughts now. So I'd like you to think of a snow globe. Imagine that the globe is your mind and the snowflakes in it are your thoughts. Right? So the water is clear when the thoughts are calm. And Buddha said, if you let cloudy water settle, it will become clear. And in the same way, if you let your mind settle, it will become clear.
Yeah.
So your book is spiritual, if you think Buddhism is spiritual. But it's, it's like there's logic in here, because it's when I'm stressed out and the boss is shouting at me and, I've got work to do, deadlines, I'm juggling so many things at once, and someone puts me on the spot and says, why haven't you done this?
Yes.
I can't give an answer because I've just I don't know what to do, I'm overwhelmed. But if it's a quiet day and someone says, why haven't you done this? I can say, well, actually, I have done it. Have you not seen my email? Or something like this,
Yeah.
And it's the same, we're much better capable of having a good image of our lives, good perspective on lives when when the thoughts are settled,
But that's the thing. The majority of sort of self-help out there asks you to do something with your thoughts.
Yeah.
Either analyze them, and I think, or like change them to thinking positive or something. So there's more work to do. There's constantly more work to do. Where there's time to just chill, when there's time. So, You talked about, because I think it's also important, is that it's not that we don't have intuition or that we don't have inner wisdom or whatever you want to call it. I believe we all have it. And call it intuition, call it inner wisdom, call it whatever you want, right? It's just that we're so not used to listening to it, because we never get quiet, because we never get ourselves a chance. And this is one of the reasons why, when you can look at your life in hindsight and you can think, oh, I felt that this was not the right choice. I felt that this was not the way to go. I actually had a sense that this and that, right? So I really believe that and again, listen, I love to learn things. I read constantly. I constantly research something. So I am absolutely addicted to, I love knowledge. I just love to be learning new things. So I'm the first person to encourage you to learn, to expand your mind, to be curious, to open your horizons. I'm like the first person to tell you that. But at the same time, what I'm saying is, you have your own uniqueness. You have your own groove. You have your own natural way of doing things, right? So don't listen and learn, but always check in with yourself. Don't just blindly follow anybody else's advice, in particular if it doesn't resonate with you, if it just doesn't feel right, And that's what I'm talking about. You don't have to be a spiritual person in order to be in tune with your intuition, or whatever you want to call it, And this is why I have such a problem with these concepts, because the moment that I experienced, that I talk about in the book, the third stage of my evolution, right, was the moment of, I don't even want to call it an awakening. I don't want to call it that way. And you know why? Because it has so much weight to it. It has so much preconceived ideas. And again, that awakening is something that is only reserved to people that meditate for hours on the top of the mountain in India, and so on and so forth. And I really believe that we all have the capacity to have a new insight. Let's call it an awakening. Let's call it an enlightenment. Let's call it an aha moment. It really doesn't matter. What matters is that we all have the capacity within us to change the way we see life fundamentally in a split second. So when you talk about the moment when you realized that you don't have to be miserable, right? What do you think happened? That is your wisdom speaking. That is your intuition, or whatever. You had a moment of insight that came from within. You didn't meet someone on the street and say, hey, and by the way, do you know you don't have to be miserable? To which, if you were miserable, you would tell him probably to bugger off or something like that.
But I think that we do have that insight, but sometimes we don't know it. So, I was reading self-help books, I was reading stuff online, I was talking to people, and it was all kind of like, I was hearing it, but it wasn't going in. I was going, yeah, I get it. I get what you're saying, but...
Like, I hear you, but...
But then it happened. It did go in a little bit, but it kind of made me aware that I did have a power to, take responsibility for my awareness and my perspective. Do you remember the time, was there a moment when the light went on?
It was when I was sitting with Michael in Arizona.
So it just clicked.
And we were having lunch, and we talked about something completely unrelated to what we were just talking about. And it was just boom. I mean, honestly, it was as if I had an out-of-body experience. As if I had a bird's eye view of my life and myself, This is how it felt to me. And I saw myself and my life without any thoughts attached. And
so completely non-judgmentally?
Zero, and I've never experienced so much clarity ever since, so much peace of mind. I saw very clearly that whatever looked problematic to me, it came from thought, I saw very clearly that we live in that thought-created reality. So we constantly feel our thinking. We constantly feel how we think about anything, 24/7. And it was just, I can't, and this is what this is why, anything that's intangible like that, like this experience, it's very difficult to explain. It's very difficult to explain. But I have zero tolerance for people who claim to be open-minded, but dismiss these experiences as something irrelevant or woo-woo just because at the moment there's no language or methodology in science that is able to, explain it in such a way that will make sense. We all have these experiences, but what I love about the fact that it happened to me is that I was just having lunch and I was this ordinary person that wasn't committed to any spiritual practices 24/7, and it happened to me. And ever since, I've seen this happen or heard of things like this happen in pubs to people, on the walk or on the plane or something. And I keep on saying this is really important because this means that we really all of us have the capacity to experience that kind of really life-changing shift and moment of perspective. But you are absolutely right. There is a major difference between intellectual understanding and understanding something on a deeper level, which when we understand something on a deeper level, that's when we say, oh, the penny dropped, or like, I had an aha moment. Which is why, for example, you can give me a book and say, this book changed my life. You have to read this, right? And I was like, okay, Chris, I want to change my life. Let's read it.
But what's really interesting about this is that I could say to you, read this book. It will change your life.
Yes.
And you could read it and go,
like,
it doesn't work for me. Like meditation.
Right.
Like I know other people who meditation doesn't work for them.
Yes.
Or other people who have done the things that I've suggested doing, and it's not worked for them. But they've gone away and done something else, and they've had a penny drop moment. And actually, when we come to talk about it, we realize that we both had an understanding of the same things, but the route we took to get there was different.
And I love that. And I love that about humanness, which is why when we started talking, I said to you, I have zero judgment. I'm not in the business of telling you whether you are on the right path or whether you get this or don't get this. We are so unique. We have our individual paths. And I really believe wherever you are in life, this is exactly what you're meant to be. And however you see life, that's exactly how you're supposed to see it. It's not my business to tell you whether this is good or good enough,
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that what you experience with your insight, you were ready to hear this differently. If I have this book that changed your life and I read it and I'm like, I have no idea what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Like, this is bullshit, or like, I can't resonate, or something like that. It's got nothing to do with the book.
Yeah, completely.
It's got to do with the fact that this was the right timing for you, or you were ready to hear something differently,
Or it was just in the language that I needed to receive it. So that however the message is wrapped up.
Yeah. So, I really want to avoid on purpose, because I have to tell you this one, right? So I know how I told you that I was asked, how do you want your reader to feel? And one of the things was like, I want them to feel like I don't talk at them, I don't tell them what to do, we just have a conversation, right? Another one was that I didn't want anyone to read this book and at any point go blah, 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 or close the book and go, oh my God, what a load of, right? And honestly, this was like on my agenda as I was writing it. So honestly, when I saw a review on Amazon, I have no idea who wrote it. It just says Amazon customer,
Yeah.
And it says, this is not your typical blah, blah, blah self-help book. I was like, yes, like check, because it really meant a lot to me to be able. So, I avoid spiritual lingo, and absolutely, I am really talking about spiritual things in the book. That's true. It's just that it took me a couple of years, 3 years, from the moment I started thinking about writing that book to actually find the language that will speak about these things without using these terms.
Yeah.
And in a way that every human being, whether you're 18 or 40 or 80 or where you're at in your life, will be able to resonate. And that was definitely my goal.
Because I think the thing is with life, we're all trying to figure out what it's all about. You know, whether we're the mechanic in the garage, whether we're the salesperson in the supermarket, whether we're the president of the United States. You know, we're all trying to make sense of it, get along as best we can, and figure it out. That's why church exists. You know, that's why religions exist. That's why there are so many different philosophies on life, because we're trying to figure it out. And where we are, who we are, the way we've been brought up, all these kind of external influences will factor into what resonates for us. And so I think even though some people might find the answers in Islam, some people might find them in Christianity, when you boil it all down, a lot of the stuff we're talking about today is actually the same stuff that we've been talking about for thousands of years. And you know, I talked about Taoism because there's a certain amount of that in your book, although not expressly, but the kind of concepts are, particularly when you're talking about when you're going through a dark period. Don't look into it, just get on with it. Just get on with whatever it is, something else. Don't, you know, if you're feeling miserable, just accept that you're feeling miserable. And there's nothing you can do about that, so distract yourself. And actually, when you start to look elsewhere and busy yourself with other things, it will pass before you realize it, and it will actually speed things up. And in Taoism, it came from Chinese, at least my understanding was that Taoism arose out of the kind of Chinese agricultural, I don't want to call it industry, era maybe, several thousand years ago, because it's pretty brutal. Working the land anyway is pretty brutal, and the seasons can become very hard. And Taoism is about just going with it, going with the flow of nature, and just don't question it. Don't look for any meaning.
Don't judge it.
Yeah, because the moment you start trying to judge, when is winter going to end? When am I going to be able to get out and plough the fields? When am I going to be able to see the crops?
What it's going to be like?
Yeah, and you're thinking, oh God, it's been going on forever. That's when life becomes unbearable. But when you're just kind of going with it, trust that, you know, it will end. You know, that's when it ends.
A lot of it, this is exactly what I'm saying. It's really about, first of all, being okay with not feeling okay.
Yeah.
You know, it really, because like we were saying before, a lot of self-help industry, again, innocently perpetuate this idea that there's this constant positive state of mind. So people are trying to reach it, obviously, because if it exists, so let me work on it, right? So as soon as they start feeling low, or they quit on the techniques or exercises or practices and so on, then they feel even worse about themselves because they're like, I can't even stick to this one. You know what I mean? I'm a failure again. Like I will never get it right, and things like that. So a lot of what I'm talking about is really about becoming, the moment people stop being afraid of being human, you know, and that to me means just feeling everything, you know, good and bad, and just accept that, you know, the more at peace they begin to feel, because they, like I said to you even before we started, a lot of discomfort comes from actually fighting our feelings, because we spend so much energy on trying to fight against feeling the way we're feeling, that it causes actually even more and more frustration. So I would say that, you know, acceptance of, and being okay with not feeling okay, and realizing that this has nothing to do with you, with who you are. You know, it doesn't mean that you're broken. It doesn't mean
or a failure or
a bad person, or that there's anything wrong with you. You know, I think this is very, very, very crucial, and understanding that, you know, one of the ways we get ourselves into a major mental shitstorm is exactly through analysis. You know, which is, as soon as we feel low, We go, why am I feeling this way? And honestly, as soon as you start asking yourself this question, why, you go into analysis mode. And it's guaranteed that you're going to find multiple reasons why you're feeling terrible that are outside of you. You know, it's going to be a person, it's going to be a situation, and so on. And it will really sound compelling, in particular when you are in a low mood, right? So what I'm saying is, feel what you're feeling. I'm not asking you to stop feeling, or to fight your feelings when you're feeling low. I'm just saying accept that and stop looking for the answers. Because honestly, you will find something, but it's not true. You know what I mean? It will look like it's true, but it's actually not true. So if you can just, so it's also not about denying how you feel. I don't want people to think that I'm just denying how they're, you know, it's about self-denial or something like that. No, it's just I recognize that I'm feeling shit, so I'm going to feel shit, but I'm not going to dwell on it.
But it's interesting because that is another kind of theme. Right at the beginning of the book, you talk about, so with regards to the negative moods, it's kind of like the more we dwell on it, the more we dig into it, the kind of worse we make it in a way. But when we acknowledge it, and just busy ourselves, you know, distract ourselves, watch TV, whatever we need to do to kind of just ride it out. It kind of hastens calms the storm much quicker. Yeah. And there's another thing we talk about. Right at the beginning of the book, you talk about, you know, when you can't remember someone's name. And the harder you try, the further away. I mean, you know who they are, you know their face, and it's on the tip of your tongue, but the harder you try to remember,
the more frustrated you get.
Yeah, and the further away the knowing of remembering what their name is. Yeah. But as soon as you kind of forget about it and start thinking about something else, then the name comes to you. Yeah. And you talk about this as actually how you find your purpose in life as well. Stop fighting, stop trying to find your purpose and get on with it and just...
I can't believe you're saying this, because I just had this amazing conversation with someone who I'm going to have on my podcast with Wendy Hewlett. She's a writer, and we talked about exactly that. Finding your purpose is another area in the self-help industry as well, you know, and again, innocently has become problematic in my view, because people feel as if unless I find my purpose like tomorrow, I'm screwed. Okay?
Yeah, the clock is ticking.
Yes, the clock is, some kind of clock is ticking.
Yeah. Who knows? Yeah.
I don't know where the clock is or what kind of clock is it, but it's ticking, right? The imaginary clock is ticking. And then there's this thing that's this purpose that once you find it, it's like all your problems will go away and you're going to experience nothing but well-being for the rest of your life.
And wealth and happiness and fitness.
I mean, you're going to be just fulfilled. You're going to be on the top of your game.
Shine.
I mean, honestly, like, you know, this bliss, basically, right?
Nirvana,
Yeah. So, and you know, I had this. I mean, it's so crazy that because I don't know if you know that, but I'm incredibly passionate about helping young people design meaningful lives. You know, and I'm looking always for opportunities to help them. I'm talking about university students, so like before they go off to do life. You know, and one of the so when I did like a test drive course at Imperial College with them, it was like a 7-week course. One of their greatest revelations when they gave me feedback at the end was that they didn't have to have it all figured out. Yeah. Because their parents were pressing, the university was pressing, everyone around them, including themselves, you know, they felt that pressure that they have to have it all figured out. They have to find that purpose, because if they don't find it, you know, they're screwed, right? And it's been screwing them up, you know, this thought that that's necessary in order for you to enjoy life.
Well, I remember specifically walking to the gym once in my early 30s, thinking to myself, what am I going to do with my life? Why don't I have it figured out? Everyone else seems to have it figured out. And it was the same thought I used to get when I was driving to work in the woods, and I'd pull over in the woods and be like pacing up and down, like, what am I doing with my life? And I still don't have it figured out, but I guess I'm kind of a little bit more okay with that right now. Because,
I'm the same.
You know,
I have no idea where I'm going with this.
It's crazy, isn't it?
With this thing called life. But you're absolutely right. But again, we never question ourselves, why is this a problem? because I didn't know for the majority of my life where I was going or what I wanted. And I continuously thought that there was something wrong with me because I didn't have those answers. But I never asked myself, but according to who is it a problem?
Yeah.
Like who created this idea that it's not okay to not know what you're gonna do?
And also this concept of the harder we try to find out, the further away the answer gets. But actually, if we just got on with living life, we might actually find what our purpose is.
Because actually, the harder you try to figure it out in your head, then the noisier your head becomes. In which case, there is no space for clarity. There is no space for new thought to pop in.
And you're like the snowstorm that's...
Like you're constantly shaking that snow globe, and you can't see whatever it is there to be seen, you know, at any given moment, right? Which is why, for example, I don't meditate, but I go for long walks.
Yeah.
Okay? Because, again, it's about I found something that works for me. When I go for a walk, somehow my mind settles.
Well, it's funny. I know a lot of people who don't meditate, but they might be long distance runners, or they might enjoy going to the gym.
Yeah.
And really, that's all meditation.
Yeah.
It's just a way of kind of finding some peace in the day, you know.
Which is why I keep on going back to saying, look, listen to people, do things, try things, but you have to find something that works for you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You have to find something, which is why, you know, in the book I give an example of dealing with writer's block. And honestly, even though I wrote the book, I have a thing that I can't identify myself as a writer. I don't know why. I just think I don't deserve to call myself that way because, you know, for me, J.K. Rowling is a writer, Stephen King is a writer, you know, but like I just wrote a book basically.
I guess
you
it's
know?
like those labels, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. But again, it comes from my own preconceived ideas about what it takes to call yourself a writer. Well, I don't call myself a writer. I don't mean it in a self-deprecating way at all. I just don't. I don't have to have this label, you know, and I'm okay with that. But I did experience what writer's block feels like, right? Yeah. And I remember, and the only reason why I talk about it is because it translates to any other example in life, which is immediately when I started experiencing this frustrating feeling of like nothing's coming up, and yet I want to write, and it's not coming, it's not happening. You know, immediately, rather than going within, like you say, right? Our default setting seems to be to look outwards for answers or solutions, right?
So you start Googling.
Just start Googling. Yeah. Just basically ask Google, and, you know, ask the Oracle Google, and you're going to know everything, right? So I looked at books, I looked at articles, you know, how to overcome this, you know, and things like that. And all I was getting was I was already having a lot of noise made of my own thoughts about I should be writing. Why is it not happening to me? You know, these are all thoughts that I was already shaking that globe. And by reading these articles and books, I was shaking I was just adding more and more and more to the noise. So again, there was no space in my head for clarity, for creativity, for any new ideas to pop in because my mind was so busy, right? And then I got tired of it, and then I realized, oh, okay, so maybe when nothing is coming out, it makes sense to just leave it and just go for a walk, do something else, you know? And this is what happened. As soon as I stopped fighting, as soon as I embraced the fact that nothing is coming up. So if it's not coming up, it's not meant to come up, you know? And first of all, got okay with it, stopped treating it as a problem, and just did what naturally occurred to me to do rather than listening to somebody else's advice, of which a lot of the advice was no. When you feel writer's block or when you feel resistant, sit down and push yourself.
Have you read The War of Art?
Yes.
Stephen Pressfield.
I have a big problem with this book.
Well, I mean, he talks about
resistance. I love him.
Yeah, absolutely.
I separate the stuff that people say from the. I still.
Well, yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
I can disagree with the what he's saying in the book, but I can still respect the person, and I very much respect him. You know, I disagree a lot with majority of things with Mark Manson, but I still love his books. You know, I still love the guy. I love the fact that he has balls to say the things that he's saying. He's true to himself. He's sharing his truth without imposing his truth on anybody else.
And that's the thing. When you start to find your authentic voice, when you stop doing things according to other people, the things you should be doing, that's when you find your authentic voice, and that's when things start to fall into place for you. So,
totally.
Which has happened with Mark Manson,
yeah,
which is happening to you. You found much more sense of purpose, I guess. You're now a transformational coach as well as a...
Well, I have been since 2011.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So this is like...
Yes.
I mean, your life is now... You're steering your ship, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I do have a sense of purpose. And, you know, with the book, that was another thing. I remember when I finally decided that I was going to write a book, I knew that I was either going to be 100% honest, write it with my own style. You know, I basically write the same way I talk, I think. I don't think there's a difference. Although I swear a lot more in real life, but I've been doing a really good job not doing it here. You know, but I made a commitment to myself that I was either going to write it without filters, even and knowing, Chris, that a lot of what I say stands in opposition to a lot of psychological theories out there, because just to take an example of analysis, a lot of psychology is based on the analysis, and I'm telling you not to analyze things, right? I mean, I'm not telling you not to, I'm just explaining why it is not always a good idea, or why it actually rarely is, right? But I just knew that I was either going to write it and be myself and be honest with my own authentic voice, or I wasn't going to write it at all, you know? And even if it meant backlash, even if it meant criticism, this pull to do that, because I really wrote it because I knew that what I was sharing in the book was making difference to people. Maybe not all of the people, but a lot of people.
Well, I mean, even if there's just one person who reads it and it helps them, then you've made a difference.
I'm telling you, the reviews that I have been receiving, a lot of tissues have been used and a lot of wine been drunk, just reading and receiving not just reviews, but people actually, because obviously a lot of stories are so personal that people just can't share them in the Amazon reviews. So what they would do, they would write a review on Amazon, and then they would email me to share sort of the backstory of whatever has shifted for them. Honestly, I was the first few reviews, I was in pieces, like all the time. It was so incredibly emotional, and this is what drives me. I fully accept, Chris, that my book is not going to be everybody's cup of tea, that I'm not everybody's cup of tea. I really don't expect everyone to agree with me or like me, okay? But I'm definitely focusing on stories like the ones I've just mentioned, because it really confirms that what I'm doing is just being on my right path.
And as well, when you see the world from an inside out perspective, it doesn't really matter if it doesn't. Whereas you're not trying to please everyone anymore.
No.
I hope you enjoyed that. That was me talking to Dr. Maggie Gilewicz, the author of the new book, How to Make Sure Your Life Doesn't Suck. So all the relevant links and everything, they're in the show notes, so check them out on my blog, chrisbrock.uk, or you can just find her books on Amazon. It's not difficult to find, maggiegilewicz.com. And I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I'm sorry the video cut out abruptly at the end, but if you want the full conversation, then check it out on iTunes or Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts. All right, until the next time, see you later.